Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Carol Fitzgerald from readinggroupguides.com, a website from the Book Report Network. And I am so happy to be the host of the video podcast series Book Reporter Talks To. This is a very special event that we came up with, I guess about 3 or 4 years ago now, was our Bookaccino live book group, where our guest this evening is Ariel Lawhon. And what we're going to be discussing is her national best-selling novel, The Frozen River, which, when it was first published this time last year, was a Good Morning America Book Club pick, an NPR Book of the Year, People Magazine Book of the Week, an Amazon Editor's Pick, a Indie Next List pick, and a Kirkus Book of the Year. So we're talking about a book that had a lot of excitement just as soon as it came out, when it came out on December 5th last year. Our reviewer on Book Reporter, Pamela Kramer, had this to say about it, and it's so dead on. A book club would have myriad topics to discuss after reading this thoughtful novel about a time when the healthcare of women was often better left entirely to women themselves. I had the pleasure of reading this book over the last week. I was late to the party, and boy, was I sorry that I waited so long. It's my latest Book Reporter Bets On selection. I'll have that copy up later this week. And I regret to not getting to this last December when everybody else had read it. So let's talk about what we're going to do for the format tonight. Let me start by noting that we're assuming that everyone has read the book. This is book club where we assume you read. You're not just coming for the drinks, you're not just coming for the cocktails, and you're not coming for the gossip. You're coming to actually discuss the book, and we're going to be talking spoilers. I'm going to begin with a discussion with Ariel where I'm going to skate around some questions that some of our readers have been asking. And then we're going to have a couple of readers join us to talk about the Frozen River. And I will be asking questions for a few camera shy attendees as well, who submitted questions in advance. And then we're going to go questions from the audience. So if you have a question as the evening goes on rather, if you could drop it into the Q&A down below, our editorial director, Tom Donadio, later on in the evening, will go through those questions. Anything that hasn't been asked before, he will jump on and make sure that we get through the evening asking. So just remember, Q&A, not in the chat. In the chat, just tell us who you are, city and state where you're from, country too, if you're from out of the country. And let me just see if there's anything else. Nope, there's no other housekeeping behind us. And with that, let's welcome Ariel to the stage.
Hello.
Hello and welcome, welcome, welcome. It's
Thank
great to see
you.
you again. We met back in 2016 in Denver at the Public Library Association convention where we were talking about Flight of Dreams. And it seems
Yeah.
like a lifetime ago. It doesn't seem like how many books ago was that?
Ooh, that
Seriously.
was 3 books ago, 8 years. I'm trying to think. I would have had an 8-year-old then. Our
Wow.
youngest would have been 8 years old.
See, time flies.
Yeah.
In the middle, we had like a pandemic. In the middle, we had we learned to
There's a few
Zoom,
things
all
to
these
keep us
kinds of
busy.
things. So let's start with how you discovered Martha Ballard, because I love the story. So let's hear that first.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who aren't familiar, I always like to start by saying that there are 3 things you should know about Martha Ballard. The first is that she was a midwife in the late 1700s who delivered over 1,000 babies in the course of her career. The second is that she kept a diary for over 30 years at a time when most women could not read or write. I actually have my copy here. This is my copy of Martha Ballard, her diary. You can see how loved it is. And in this diary, she recorded every birth, every death, every scandal, and every murder that happened in the town of Hallowell, Maine. And it is the contents of that diary that inspired my novel. And the third thing that you should know about her is that she was the great aunt of Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, and she was the great great grandmother of Mary Hobart, who is one of the first female physicians in the United States. So the medical legacy that she left us is almost unparalleled. And I had never heard her name. And most women that I know had never heard her name. And I would never have known who she was if not for a random doctor's appointment in August of 2008. It was August 8th, 2008, actually. Um, I remember this specific date because I was pregnant with my fourth son. My husband and I had four boys in 5 years. No, I had four boys in 5 years. He provided the occasional assist, but I'd gone to the doctor for a routine checkup. I was about 6 months pregnant, and my doctor was late. He had gotten stranded at the hospital with a really tricky delivery. So I got stuck in his waiting room and I was there all afternoon. And I had two choices that day. I could reschedule and go home. There were children there that I did not currently miss, and my husband had them. So I decided to stick it out in his waiting room, and I was there all afternoon. I was there for hours, and I finished the novel that I brought with me, and then I read all of the magazines in the office, and there was nothing left in the end except for this kind of pile of scary pamphlets in the corner. And at the bottom of that was a small devotional called Our Daily Bread, really common in doctors' offices in Texas at the time. So I opened it to that date, August 8th, 2008. And I read the story of a woman named Martha Ballard who had delivered over 1,000 babies in her career and never lost a mother in childbirth. And I remember sitting there, pregnant myself, thinking, my own doctor, the one that I'm waiting on, can't boast a record like that. And then my next thought was, that would make a great novel. So I ripped the page out and I put it in my purse. I stole it. I have to pause here and say that it was not like a very fancy leather-bound devotional. It was disposable. It's meant to be thrown away after 3 months. I have to say that because I get hate mail about desecrating a book. But I kid you not, my doctor walked in 2 minutes later. 2 minutes later. And had he been on time that day, this book would not exist in the world. I would have never heard of Martha Ballard. I would have never thought to write her story.
Right.
And occasionally, when I see the cover or somebody sends me a kind note, I will think about that day in that doctor's office and just how fate is this really tricky thing, you know?
And then you give son number four an extra piece of candy, an ice cream cone, because you're the reason I was sitting there that afternoon. Let's get real.
Oh, trust me, he's put me through it.
Put you through your paces. What I loved was the way you really showed us the reality of life in Maine in 1789. And we're going to get into your research on Martha later, but I want to start with how you set the stage for that period. Like I felt like I was there. I was actually outside reading the book for part of it, and it was like cold and wintry. And I was like, wow, you really, put that. So how did you go about that research to get the timing right?
Oh, that's a great question. So the difficult part of my job is always what to include. There is so much. For instance, this is 30 years worth of her life. I couldn't write a novel that covers 30 years. Actually, I'm writing one now that covers more than that, but I knew for this story that I could not, that that's not what the story needed to be. And so, as I was researching, as I was learning more about Martha, I found this one passage in her diary where the river, the Kennebec River that runs through Hallowell, Maine, froze solid. It did that occasionally, but this one particular year, it was solid for 6 months. And for 6 months, from the end of November to the end of April of the following year, the entire town, the inhabitants were trapped.
Wow.
In this town over the course of this long winter. And as I was building it, I thought, oh, that would be perfect. That's the perfect setting for a murder mystery. The first scene in the novel, or sorry, the first line in the book is the body floats downstream.
Mm-hmm.
We have a dead body in the first sentence. We have a town trapped together for 6 months. And then from there, it was just a matter of populating the story, have a tavern, and we've got a general store, and we've got all of these people and all of their homes. We've got divided loyalties, we have mistrust, we have gossip. What small town isn't complete without a few gossips?
Yeah.
And the natural world itself was fairly easy to create. The river kind of becomes a character in the novel itself. The harder part actually was the fact that the entire book takes place in winter. And I realized about 80 pages in, there are only so many ways to describe snow. And I've used them all.
Yes. mushy,
Yeah.
gray.
So then it was just a matter of, I don't know, bringing in all of the other senses and trying to make you feel like you were there in those homes or in that tavern or by that fire with Martha. And because the entire novel is um, told in first person
Yeah.
present tense, you only see what she sees. You are right there with her every moment of that book throughout the entire thing.
So did you always know you're going to write it in first person?
Fun fact, the first draft that I turned into my editor was in third person.
Hmm.
And I read it and I it's the only book I've ever done this with. I sent an editorial letter to my editor when I turned it in, and I was like, this is what needs to be fixed. Here's my plan to fix it. Here are things that I know need to be fixed, but don't know how to fix. So you're going to have to help me. And then I ended the letter by saying, also, now that I'm done, I think I wrote it wrong. I feel too distant from her. I think it needs to be in first person.
Mhm.
And she wrote back and she was like, I think you're right. But the reason that I wrote it in third is the novel before that, Codename Helene,
Mhm.
I had written in first person, also present tense. And when I started Frozen River, the voice for my last character was so loud in my head still. I couldn't get her out of it. And I thought, okay, this is not going to work. The only way that I can move forward on this book is if I do it entirely different. So I did third person past tense and I was able to move forward with the story. But again, it wasn't until I got to the end that I was like, it's wrong. It's
Yeah, you just
wrong.
get that moment. And you're like, now, was it always called the Frozen River?
It was so I'm 50-50 on titles. Half the time I get to keep my title, half the time the publisher changes it, but this time it was perfect.
Probably perfect. And did the first line change, or was that like that's the one
Never
thing?
changed, not one time. So that first scene was it never changed. And
Right.
so every time I sit down to write a novel, there's always this moment where kind of like you're hemming and you're hawing and you don't know what to do. But then I will write something and I will be like, oh, there it is. I'm in it now. And with that particular scene, it was time to start. Like the clock was ticking on my deadline. And one of my boys had baseball practice. So I took my notebook and I took a pen and some water and a sports chair. I was sitting on, outside the fence watching him practice. And I was like, well, I got to start somewhere. Just write down the first thing. And it was the body floats downstream. And I went, oh, there it is. And then I wrote the paragraph. And then I wrote the rest of that scene sitting there at baseball practice that day. And it, other than just like if, some sentence arrangement here and there, it didn't change at all throughout the whole process.
Wow. See, if it was a game, you'd have to say to the mothers, is he up? Let me know.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
nudge me.
the great thing about baseball is nothing happens and then everything happens. So it's all at
Exactly.
once. If your kid is not on the field, you don't got to worry about it.
No, no, you don't have to worry about it. If your kid is pitching, you're not watching anyway. You don't want to know.
Oh
You
gosh,
don't know.
it's nerve-wracking. And he's a pitcher, so yeah.
Nerve-wracking, nerve-wracking. Debbie Moore is going to join us right now. She's a long time participant in these events. She's one of our favorite people because she always has such
Mhm.
great questions. And she's joining us, I think, from Syracuse, New York today. Am I right? Yeah.
You are.
So, Debbie, here you go. I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, it's the perfect book for Syracuse, New York today because it's snowing.
Yes,
It snowed a lot about
you
1 hour
did.
there, like 5 feet. But I was really I love this story of Martha Ballard. Mm, what intrigued you the most about her life, and was it difficult? I'm a lawyer, so I was very interested in the legal part of it.
Mhm.
Um, was it difficult to find information about the legal proceedings in that time and the fact that there were so many constraints on women,
Mhm.
including that they couldn't even defend themselves?
No, she does not look like your typical swashbuckling heroine, but I was absolutely fascinated by the fact that this was a woman who went about her daily life for 30 plus years. She recorded it faithfully. She served all of the people in her world. And in that daily faithful life, in keeping this diary, she wrote herself into American history. We would not know she existed if she had not kept this diary. And actually, the longest passage in that diary is about the rape trial of Rebecca Foster. So this book is a murder mystery. It is also a rape trial. And in both instances, it relies heavily on the legal system at that time. even though you can go to the court records today, you can see what the verdict was. Martha Ballard was the only person who bothered to write down what happened in court, what people said, but she also wrote down all of the events leading up to that. And this event, that rape trial, completely unhinged the community that she lived in. And I remember reading that thinking, golly, we assume that to be worth a story means you should make the newspapers, you should make history. But this was a woman who lived an incredibly faithful life and changed history because of that. And I thought that kind of story deserves to be told as well. Regarding the legal system, I had to tell my editor when I turned the book in, because she wrote back and she's like, okay, this is great, but what about due process? And what about this? And what about that? And I was like, oh no, you have to take everything you think you know about the legal system and you have to chuck it out the window. We have the Constitution. We'd had it for a year when this story takes place. It was the first 5 articles. The Bill of Rights had been written, but it had not been ratified. The Supreme Court sat for the first time. It was either February or March of 1790, so toward the end of this book. As you mentioned, women could not testify in court apart from the presence of their husbands or their fathers, with one exception, and that was midwives who were testifying in issues of paternity. There was a law on the books in Massachusetts at the time. Maine was still a district of Massachusetts, but the law was called A Law for the Punishment of Fornication and the Maintenance of Bastard Children. And on the surface, the purpose of this particular law was to make sure that any woman who had a child out of wedlock had a means of provision for that child. She could tell the court the name of the father. It was interesting that they believed her. She'd state a name, they believed her. That man was required to pay child support. So that was the stated purpose of the law, but in reality, it became this means of public shaming because those girls were required to go to court. They would be fined. Sometimes they would have to spend a night in jail. And that same law required a midwife, such as Martha Ballard, to ask the name of the father during childbirth. It was part of her remit, part of her licensing as a midwife. And so she would do this. She would deliver a baby and she would always ask the mother who the father was. And this is fascinating to me. The writers of the law truly believed that a woman could not lie during childbirth, that she physically could not lie, which is hilarious to me because I would have lied to you just for talking to me. Those men knew nothing about childbirth and less about women. And you would think, this is 50 years post-Puritan era, you would think surely Martha Ballard could not be in court doing this very often. Well, turns out Puritans not so pure. If you read her diary, which you're probably not, you find out pretty quickly that 4 in 10 first pregnancies were conceived out of wedlock during the years that she practiced midwifery. 1 or 2 in 10 was born outside of wedlock. So in effect, you have lots of shotgun weddings and you have lots of 9-pound premature babies. Oh, gee, Johnny is not due for another 2 months, but look how big he is. And it's so fascinating to read her diary because she never judges these women. She's writing about it in this really matter-of-fact way. A midwife, more than anyone, understands how people come to be in the world. And she understood her role in all of this was A, to have a living mother and child at the end of a delivery, but also to advocate for these women in court. She would go to court, she would help them, she would advocate for a lesser fine, lesser jail time. Sometimes she would pay their fines herself if they couldn't afford it. And that kind of circles back to your first question. This was a woman who could no more imagine us sitting here tonight talking about her, marveling at what she has done, than she could imagine an airplane or a toaster. She just lived her life faithfully. That astonished me.
I've read several of your books, and in each of them, your female protagonists are not only strong women, but they're also unconventional ones. And what draws you to these women's stories?
That's a good question. I think I was raised by one, so I know one when I see it. My mother is astonishing. My mother was actually the one that taught me to love midwives. She had myself and all five of my siblings at home with midwives. So I grew up in those offices. I grew up going to those appointments. But just in general, I think being a woman in the world, being a student of history, I am always astonished by the ones that stood up, by the ones that wouldn't back down, by the ones that kicked up dust, by the ones that said what they were thinking. I love nothing more than a woman who speaks her mind. So, as a reader and just a person, I'm drawn to those stories. And then as I began to write, I found myself wanting to tell them.
Oh, thank you. I'm really looking forward to your next book. As you said at the beginning, that you're kind of working on it. So I hope it comes out soon because all your books are very amazing. And thank you very much for writing them.
Thank you very much. I'm working on it. I'm trying. I'm at the point that I get to in every book that I think, oh, I chose the wrong job. I should have been a dermatologist or something. Like, so thank you. I'm working on it. We're trying.
I think you chose the right job.
I thought you were going to say you wrote yourself into a hole. No, I think I have the wrong job.
Well, I write myself into a hole quite frequently. That happens a lot.
Got a question from Regina Waldrop. She said, Martha is so likable. It is the protagonist in your books that have the greatest impact on me so far. Would you characterize Martha, and what was your initial priority when you found the real life Martha? Was it making her accessible, admirable, highlighting the similarities between women then and now? And did your original vision for Martha's character change much throughout the development?
That's a really good question. Going into it, I knew, like, you always have this big idea. This is a woman and she's a midwife and she's delivered 1,000 babies. And so I had this broad idea of who she was. And then when I began sort of winnowing down my research and looking at her story, all I really knew going into it was that I wanted her to be a mature woman. I wanted her to be in the prime of her life. I did not want to write a story about a young, buxom blonde. Nothing wrong with that. Have written those stories, enjoyed them. Used to be young and buxom myself. I was never blonde. There is an absolute place for that. But at this point in my life, I really find that I want to see more mature women on the page. I want to see a mature woman get to be the hero. I want to see her solve the murder. And I want to see her live a really fulfilling romantic life. We have this idea that romance and love and that kind of joy is only for the young character. But I wanted to give that to her because I want to read that. I've only been married 24 years. I say only. A friend of mine, when I told her that we'd hit our 20th anniversary and I was so excited and I was like, we made it. She goes, oh, honey, you can do anything for 20 years. So now I say I have only been married for 24. But when this novel opens, Martha's been married for 35. She's been married for over 3 decades. She's given birth to 9 children, only 6 of whom are still living. This is a woman who has seen some stuff. She is the epitome of everything that I find interesting in a woman. She has a story to tell. And the other thing that I knew going into it is that I really wanted to give her a happy marriage. It is one of my other pet peeves about publishing is that we almost never get to see the happy marriage. We get all the bad ones. We get the affairs and the murders and the abuse and the lies and the scandal, and it's totally fine, makes for a great story. And I understand why we get so many of them because the bad marriage is easier to write. All of the tension is contained right there in that relationship. But if you're writing about a happy marriage, all of that tension has to come from other places in the story. So I wanted her to be mature and I wanted her to have a happy marriage. And the other thing, to get to the heart of the question, I wanted her to tell the truth about all of those things, about being married for a long time, about how hard it can be to be a woman in the world, how unfair it can be to live decades and decades as a woman in a world that opposes you. And I really, really, really wanted her to tell the truth about what it is like to be at the tail end of your mothering experience. This was the first book idea that I found. It was the fifth novel that I wrote because I myself had to grow up, had to have life experience. The girl who was pregnant, I don't know, in 2008 could not have written this book as it is today. And in large part, I had to get to the point where my boys were starting to grow up and move out, and where I had to wrestle with, who am I now? Who am I now that the lion's share of my life's work, that season is coming to a close? And those are all of the things that Martha is wrestling with in this story. Yes, there is a murder, and yes, there is this rape trial, but all of those things, being older, being married for a long time, wrestling with your children and their independent choices, that is actually what the heart of this novel is. Everything else is just what's going on around her.
Right. It's like, yes, she is the heart of it, but she's also has to have that distance. You're right. You can't write a story like this when you're 22. You can't write it when you're 32. I mean, I always have this thing that I say that women get honest in their 40s, and then everybody doesn't have to have the best boyfriend, the best house, the best this. Till then, everything you do is the best. And then all of a sudden you go, maybe it's not going to work out so great on this, but I'm still happy. And it's not this, but it's that. And it takes a while. I'm going to jump in with another question here because I'm not a Puritan here at all. Well, wow, there was a lot of unwed sex going on in those days, a lot more than I expected, especially since I'm picturing these people wearing those flouncy long dresses. And I was like, wow, there was a lot going on out there. And the fact that the women were fined in court and all of this about what was going on, it is unbelievable. When did it change? Do you know the timing of when it changed? And I'm putting you on the spot here because it's definitely not.
It is a slow progression, right? History is a slow progression. We can look to what was it, 1920, the 19th Amendment, when women got the right to vote. We can look at all of these moments in history where we took a step forward. People often ask me, oh, you write historical fiction. Like, if you could go back in time and live in any of these eras, which one would you pick? And I would say none of them. Absolutely none. The world was horrible for women universally prior to 1900. And we have slowly gotten better and better and better. And it is not perfect by any stretch, but I think it is fair to say you and I, the women that live today in this country, probably have it better than most any woman that has ever lived.
Right.
That is
in the world, even, when you can do it.
Oh, absolutely. And so it is a slow, incremental process, in no small part because of women like Martha Ballard, who were standing up in court and saying, this is garbage.
This is not the way things are going to be. Right.
Yeah. And also she was saying there were two people involved. Like, she was calling attention to
what was going on.
Yeah, what was going on. And that's our story as women, right? That's our birthright. I have this small pet peeve. Anytime I see a book that says a feminist retelling of such and such.
Yeah.
Not that I have a problem with feminist stories. I don't think we need it. I think
just tell the story.
Yeah, well, but it is all in many ways a feminist history. Martha Ballard didn't know that word, right? I don't think in any capacity she would have called herself that because she didn't have the vocabulary for that. We weren't discussing feminism in that way back then, but she was going, this isn't right, and this isn't fair, and these girls deserve better. I think that's the heart of what it really is.
Yeah.
History doesn't need me to go back and look at it with a modern mentality. I just need to tell it like it was, and you see what happens.
Right. Let me uncrooked myself before I make myself cuckoo. Hold on just one second. I go, this is definitely an interesting night, Tom and audio. Like, I usually don't have these issues. I crooked. Well, here. I'm sorry. It's like, I'm still crooked.
Oh, I can't tell if it makes you feel better.
There, that's better. Sorry about that. That's my Today Show moment. Okay. Gloria Statman from Cincinnati, Ohio had this question. I'm curious how Ariel finds and develops the voices of her characters. I don't know how writers do that. Martha was so comfortable. I really felt like Ariel was sitting in my room talking to me until I read the author's note where she had a different voice, which made me appreciate what she did and with Martha all the more. And
Yeah.
I agree. Like, you're reading this and you're really in the voice of the character. And then I was listening actually to your author's note and I was like, wait a second, different person, even though it was a different character. I get somebody else was narrating, but you get what I mean? It was,
Yeah. Finding the voice for a character is, to me, one of the absolute hardest things that I do. And it's not just the voice of the character. With Martha specifically, it's all kind of it wrapped into one because it is told in first person, but there's the voice of the character, and then there's also sort of this tone and tenor that the story, like a cadence that every story has, and it's unique to every story. And finding that can take months and months. I
Mhm,
think I have just now really, really started to find it with the book that I'm working on now. And for me, it is instinct and it is gut, and I will write and I will write and I will write, and I'm trying different things out. And then inevitably I'll get to a passage and I go, oh, there it is.
mhm,
That's what I want it to sound like. And so for Martha, because the book takes place in the 1700s, there needed to be this brevity of language, just in the way that she talked, in the way that she formed her sentences. It did not need to sound like me. I mean,
mhm,
I live in the 20th and 21st century. So I finding that is just it's process and it's gut, but it's also just looking for the thing that is right to her. The book before that takes place, book before this takes place in kind of France, World War II,
right.
1940s. And that character is real snappy and brassy, and she cusses a lot and she drinks a lot, and she's wildly fun and she's really funny. That's not what Martha is.
No.
Martha was a woman of few words. She's the kind of person who doesn't speak often, but when she speaks, you pay attention, you stop what you're doing and you listen.
Mhm,
Um, so in finding her, I was looking for women like that in my life, and I finally realized, oh, that's like my mom.
mhm,
My mom, I'm lots of words all the time. My mother is not that. My mother is taciturn and she is quiet, but again, when she speaks, you listen. And so, in a lot of ways, I channeled my mom, I channeled my sister to find her. But I'm glad to hear that she sounded comfortable to you because to me, she sounds like women that I know and love.
mhm. Dinner now shall be served. Please come into thy kitchen. Wasn't like that at all. Wasn't like that at all. Courtney Rogers from North Reading, Massachusetts said, I thoroughly enjoyed all your books. I just finished reading Codename Helene and read The Frozen River in 2 days, which I think
Oh my
is
gosh,
amazing.
it took me 2 years
I'm reading
to
the book
write.
twice for book club next year, and I'm giving my mom a copy
Oh,
for Christmas. Is this the end of your tour for this book, or are there more dates to come?
oh, that's a great question. So, I have one other event here in Nashville in January that I will be doing for the book, and then that is it. Then I get to put Martha to bed. And I have to say, I already miss her. She's the
Mm,
first character that I've ever written that I want to come back to and I want to visit again. I think a lot of it is this particular publication experience has been unlike anything else. I mean, you mentioned earlier that it was chosen as a Good Morning America book club pick. So the book published December 5th, 2023, and that was the day that I got shot out of a cannon. And I still feel kind of like I've been flying ever since. But I've been on 4 different rounds of book tour for this novel. That has never happened before in
mm-mm.
my career. By the time I get home from a trip to New York next week, I will have been gone for over 100 nights this year.
Wow.
Most of that is book related. Some of it was just personal,
Right.
but I've spent so much time with her. I've spent so much time talking about her and talking to people who have read her story that it has been this really remarkable experience. And I still feel very close to her. It does not feel like somebody that I wrote about in the past.
Yeah.
It feels like somebody who's still with me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
I'm almost done.
I'm
Almost
almost
done.
done. One more. One more. Joyce Wiseau from Lancaster, Pennsylvania had this question, which is interesting. What kind of responses are you getting from men who read your book? Our mixed book group will be discussing it in January, and I'm curious if men will appreciate the themes of the book. I want to hear back from her afterwards.
I do too, actually. Surprisingly, I've heard really, really, really great things from men. I get two comments. I really like the book. This was really great. And the other one is, oh my gosh, there's so much birth. Men are, they seem to be a little startled by the amount of birth. But also I'm like, dude, you have a wife. Like I know you know how this works. Like
Right.
we all get into the world the same way. Um, yeah, so far, men have really seemed to enjoy it. They have really good questions, I have found. They ask really interesting questions about the other men in the book, um, which I don't know, it's kind of fun.
Now,
My father-in-law's read it, and then all of his friends have read it. So I've gotten some good feedback from them as well.
well, I think that with you after that event, I want to hear back, Joyce. I want to hear what happens. I'm going to put that in the Reading Group Guides newsletter, and I'll
Yes, me
make sure
too. Let
that
me
Nicole
know.
knows as well because I really want to hear what the group does think. Let me see. I think Tom, we're ready to go to Q&A if you're ready. This is the voice of God at Tom Donadio, our fabulous editorial director. So, Tom, do you have some questions for us?
Yes, we do have some good questions. Actually, just piggybacking off what you had just asked about men reading the book. Um, we have a question from Eileen. She says, are any of your sons old enough to read this novel? As
Ah.
the mother of only sons, I appreciate that you want to share these stories of strong women.
Oh, that is a great question. So my boys are 21, 20, 17, and 16. So yes, they're all old enough to read it. I will say none of them have. All of the boys in my house, except for my husband, are wildly unimpressed with me. They could care less that this is what I do. Although I will say one of my boys is currently reading Codename Helene, my novel prior to this, and he got to the point in the book. There is a sex scene in there. They're married. I closed the door. It's not overly graphic in any sense. But he got to that scene and came down. He was like, Mom, like, huh, I can't believe you wrote this. And I was like, buddy, how do you think you got here? Like, we have had this conversation. This should not be a surprise to you, man. Um, so far, none of them have read it. They're probably not. I'm just mom, right? To them, I'm just mom. There will come a day, it's probably when I'm dead, that they're going to read my books. And I am always mindful of what I write for that day because, yes, I'm writing these big stories, and inevitably, there's almost always a really bad man in my books. And the world does not need to be reminded that there are bad men. We all know that, right? But what I have tried very hard to do in my books is write good men as well, because I
Mhm.
do think the world really needs to be reminded that there are a lot of good men. And when my boys eventually read my books, I want them to know that I knew that I know that there are good men in the world and that I believe that men are good,
Mhm.
that they are good. And I think, I don't know, it'll be really interesting to have those conversations with them later when they feel inclined to read the book. It would do no good for me now to say, you have to read this. It would just feel like homework to them. Um, so yeah, the jury's out on that one, but I'll let you know what they think one day.
I wonder what their girlfriends someday reading your books will then say to them about the books. That'd be interesting as well, because
Yeah.
that's what's going to happen somewhere along the way, is
Yeah.
and they're going to say, well, what, your mom, like, this is what she's talking about. This is great. And they're going to be, Mom's great. Yeah, I know she's great, but
They'll be like, I know she cooks great.
yeah,
Is she great? I don't know. Um,
I'm sure
yeah,
they
I
should.
they're starting to figure it out. Like it's starting to become real for them for a long time. My boys were actually convinced that I played mahjong for a living because they'd come in my office and when I'm stuck on a plot point or I'm trying to work something through in my head, I'll open mahjong on my computer and I let my conscious brain solve the visible puzzle while my subconscious brain solves the impossible puzzle. And it's 100% of the time, I can figure out what I need to do in that scene or with that plot point if I play Mahjong. But they'd come through. That's what they thought I did for a job.
I love it. It's like, Mom, that's what you do, huh? All day long, huh? Okay. I love Mahjong. Somebody just jumped down and said, I love it. I love this. Tom, what else we
I
have?
have a question from Linda. I read the book shortly after it came out, and I've been telling everyone to read it. I loved the loving relationship between Martha and her husband. Did you get that from her diaries, or is it a reflection of your marriage?
Um, Great question. Somebody told me recently that when it comes to the book. They came for the murder, but they stayed for the marriage, and that made me really happy. The representation of Martha's marriage is probably more strongly inspired by my own marriage. I am incredibly fortunate to have married a very, very good man who is incredibly supportive of me personally and then my career in general. And I wanted to portray that on the page. Again, we don't get to see that very often, but what can it look like in a novel 35 years after a woman makes the right decision? We tend to think so. I love love stories and I love romance novels. Nothing wrong with them. My one gripe is that they lie to us. And the biggest lie they tell us is that the wedding is the finish line. And if you've been married for 5 minutes, you know the wedding is just the first step in a very, very, very long journey together. But we rarely get to see what that journey can look like hundreds of miles in. And so that's what I wanted to give her. I can say this from Martha's diary. Again, she very rarely expresses an emotion. She does not editorialize her own life at all. But what we do know is that Martha and her husband remained married for the entirety of their lives. They had 9 children together, and they were equal partners in their life and in their work. You can see from her diary and also from other historical documents, they worked a mill together. They traded together. Ephraim had a surveying business that his maps and his handwriting, you can still Google those. It's incredible. He had the prettiest handwriting of anyone I've ever seen in my life. They supported each other. So no one really knows what their marriage was like specifically, but it is not a stretch to say that they were strong, equal partners. I wanted to give it more depth than that, but I like to think that my version is accurate.
Yeah. It was a lot. I mean, losing 3 children, losing, just, what happened in your life and how it was just one morning and then they were gone. And it was so difficult, just so difficult of what's going on.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest scene in the entire book to write. And it happened. All of that is true. It is all in her diary. And who are you as a couple after a loss like that? And I hear so often that kind of tragedy can either tear a couple apart or it can make them stronger than ever. But it does not come without a price.
No. There's always a price there.
Yeah.
We have a question from Vicky. Where is the diary and what prompted Martha's family to preserve it?
Oh, that is a great question. So the diary is now in possession at the Maine State Library. The entire thing has been digitized. So if you want, you can actually go online to the Maine State Library and you can look at it. Or you can try to find one of the remaining 300 or so copies that was picked and press published in a special printing. But here's the fascinating thing. Martha's diary went to her daughter. So after Martha's death, her daughter kept it, and then her daughter passed it to her daughter, and her daughter passed it to her daughter, all the way down to her great-great-granddaughter, Mary Hobart, who donated it. That might be slightly inaccurate. There's the list of how it went person to person, but the women in her family kept it and passed it on and passed it on and passed it on until it was eventually given to the Maine State Library, where it just kind of sat there as a jumble of loose pages until a historian came along and began to study it. And then somebody else transcribed it and typed it up. I mean, it was really a labor of love since Martha's death to keep these pages so that they wouldn't be forgotten. And to this day, it remains one of the only primary documents that we have left that clearly states what life was like for women at that time in Maine.
And didn't you say your copy cost some ridiculous amount of money?
$300. I bought it online at an out-of-print bookshop in Maine. I always tell people I never get my books from the library because this is what I do to them. You can just see how I highlighted it and scribbled on it. And I like to think it was a really great investment. So this particular one came with a photocopied page. So that is what her handwriting looks like.
Wow.
You can see how almost undecipherable it is. You really have to sit there it was an act of translation to get
Mm,
this written and printed. Um, but yeah, I love it. It makes me so happy.
yeah.
I'm so glad I bought it. I'm so glad I spent years with it.
Do you save all your research books that you for each book that you do?
Every book that I write, every research book, I print out each draft, all of the edits, all of the research material. When I am done, it all gets boxed up and saved. So, like for instance, this is the copy of the biography of Martha. So it's called A Midwife's Tale by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. If you want more of Martha, you can get this. It won the Pulitzer for biography in 1992. It is astonishing. But it's also other books like this, Taverns and Drinking in Early America. This will go in that box. Okay, fun fact. This is one of the most fun books to read because you realize really quickly that our founders, the early colonists in our country, thought that drinking water was bad for you. They really believed it was dangerous for your health. So they would drink beer all day, beer and wine and cider. Basically, everyone was running around drunk for the first 100 years or so of our history, which explains so much about
So
so many
much.
of the laws that were written, um, particularly that one in Massachusetts. So yeah, I've got an entire shelf there with the rest of my stuff. When I finally put Martha to bed, so to
That's when
speak.
it'll happen. When you finally put it to bed, it goes in the
Yeah.
box
Yep.
for your historical someplace where your papers will be someday.
My kids are probably gonna, I don't know, do a big burn pile. Who knows? Again, they are
No.
not impressed.
Uh,
Um, we have a question from Francis. Did you speak with any midwives? If so, how did what they had to say influence your characterization of Martha?
I'm trying to think. I have known midwives for good sections of my life. Like I said, I grew up with them. I read articles by them. The only midwife that I spoke to specifically during the writing of this was one that delivered my sister's son. I went with her to all of those appointments over the course of her pregnancy, and I would pepper her with questions and ask all kinds of things. There's a very difficult breech birth later in the book.
mhm.
It kind of helped me work through. Um, but yeah, by the time I wrote this, I was incredibly comfortable with childbirth and childbearing myself, having done it 4 times, and then having just lived a life with midwives. And that's a harder question to answer simply because I could go to a midwife working today and I could get an incredible amount of knowledge about birth. What I could not get is information on what it was like for Martha. And so I was trying to build Martha's life as a midwife based on her exact words, her diary entries, because her work is still going to be different than work today. She did not have, most midwives working today have access to hospitals. Most of them will tell you that they can give you epidurals and pain medicine, that they can make sure that you have a cesarean quickly if you need it, even if like they're working in and around hospitals. Martha was not doing any of that. It was her in a cold cabin out in the woods. And so I was really trying to be careful that I represented midwife, words, the midwifery in this novel as she experienced it,
Mhm.
not as a midwife today would.
Mhm.
So we have Monica and Kathy would both like to know more about Tempest.
Um,
Monica asks, what gave you the idea for Tempest? And Kathy added that putting in that bit of magical realism was a really nice touch.
Oh, thank you. Tempest is one of my absolute favorite characters in this book, and she's not anything that I ever planned to include. So I can give you an exact date for this one as well. It would have been June 19th, 2018. My husband and I were woken up in the middle of the night by this horrific screaming. It sounded like our most dearly beloved was being slaughtered in their sleep. He jumps up and he runs to the house. The kids are fine. We cannot figure out what is making this hellacious noise until we found a fox barking on our back deck. Listen, as soon as we're done here, if you have never heard a fox bark, go to YouTube, look it up. It will make your butt pucker. It is horrifying. It is a terrifying, terrifying noise. But the reason that I know that it was June 19th, 2018 is several hours later that morning, a baby was born into our family in very vulnerable circumstances.
Mm.
Somebody that I love very much had a child, again, in a hard circumstance, and was not going to be able to parent that child. And those two things became linked in my mind, the
Mm.
fox, the baby, the fox and the baby. And if you've read this book, you know that there's a baby born under really vulnerable circumstances. And those two things worked their way into the novel, even though I never planned it. And
Mhm.
for me, that's where the magic happens for me is I can research and I can plot and I can plan a story, but then there are those brushstrokes that inevitably come in from my own life. So the fox in my neighborhood is an orange fox, not a silver fox, but she
Mhm.
still lives here. She has her kits under my neighbor's shed every year. I get to go down and have a glass of wine and sit on a porch swing and watch them play. But I love her. I love her so much. And as you know, she opens the book and she closes the book. And I feel
Mhm.
like it's this really fitting touch.
I watch it run across the lawn in the morning, run across going that way. There are a couple of them in our neighborhood, and the noise, you're right. Mhm. Screech.
If you're not expecting it, like once you know what it is, it's kind of comforting because you know that it's either they're mating or they're just having fun and playing. But if you don't expect it, it is, oh,
Yeah.
I'm so curious now. I will definitely be checking that out on YouTube right after this program for sure. Very curious about that. Um, Barbara asks, did you include any interaction that Martha had with her patients? If not, how did you decide what to include and what to exclude?
oh yeah, there are throughout the novel, Martha, not Marcia. Martha is visiting with her friends and her neighbors. She's taking care of people. Sometimes it's for midwifery purposes. Sometimes people are pregnant, but a lot of the times they're ill. There's a woman that has a migraine. There's another woman whose baby is ill. And I think what was really eye-opening to me is that in Martha's time, midwives didn't just come deliver your baby. They were your general practitioner. So if you got hurt, they were going to give you stitches, they were going to treat your burn, they were going to set your bones. They were your pharmacist. So Martha is constantly making tinctures for, there's a woman that has a migraine. There's another woman whose child has epilepsy, and Martha is called to look at this baby. So throughout the novel, Martha is interacting with most of her community, at least to some degree, as a medical provider. And in the book, those were all just opportunities to show different sides of her medical skill, but also different sides of her personality, because you see that there are friends and neighbors she likes quite a bit, and there are others she does not like at all. And you can see that when it is more of a struggle to treat someone she doesn't like.
Yeah. And that must be difficult. You don't really like this person, but you're still going to be the midwife to their child, and
I
they're
mean,
going to
it's
be
your
rude to you
job.
or whatever.
Oh, yeah. I think about that with doctors today as well. Like
Yeah.
when I go to the doctor, I've never been given a test of how likable I am.
All right.
My doctor assesses my needs and he cares for me.
Yeah. One thing, John, before you jump into your question, do you plot all your books? Like, do you have everything written out well in advance and then start, like you've done your research,
Yes,
you fill it in?
I think it's a holdover from having so many children so quickly. There were many years that I would have 20 minutes to write a day, or I'd have to get up early, or I'd have to stay up late, or I would have to leave on Saturdays for several hours. So I needed to know what came next. I needed to know how it affected the rest of the book. And it worked. Plotting really works for me to sit down and look at the broad scope of the story. Here's a specific example for this particular one. I knew I wanted to write another murder mystery. I hadn't written, all of my books are mysteries, but I had not written a murder mystery since my debut novel in 2014. So I wanted to do that again. I knew who was going to die. I knew how he was going to die. But when I started the book, I hadn't quite figured out who killed him. But I need to know. I need to know where to place the red herrings and what brushstrokes to put in there. So I made a list of every single character in the book who was named. If they have a name, they went on a list. And it was literally, pointing at the wall in front of me. I put it on the wall in front of me. And I was like, okay, this person could, this person couldn't. I was kind of going through trying to figure out what the odds were of each of these characters being the killer. I was like, okay, who is the one person that absolutely could not do this? And just based on how I had told the story and what I had done, I circled the name of the one person that could not be the killer. I was like, okay, that's who it is. That's who done it. And then I reverse engineered the entire book
Oh.
so that that would be the person. And my assumption was, if I am certain they couldn't be the killer, then so will you. And so far, knock on wood, I've not had anybody guess it.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
We have a few people who want to know about Doctor.
Doctor.
That is
Yes.
was mentioned in Martha's diary. Linda wants to know, is she fiction?
She is not. So the woman who just goes by the name Doctor is real. In Martha's diary, only mentioned a few times, but was real as a woman. She was referred to as a uh, Black female doctor. Those were the words that Martha chose to describe her every time. Not nurse, not midwife. She said doctor. So a Black female doctor. And I remember thinking, this is Maine in the 1700s. This is astonishing that this woman was here. And whenever she would come to town, Martha's friends and her neighbors would bypass her care and go see this other woman. Martha was never offended by it. Sometimes she would lend them a horse so that they could go see doctor, but her name is never mentioned in Martha's diary. And it's really important to note that because at the time, there were 12 free Black families living in Hallowell, Maine. Massachusetts was the first state in the nation to abolish slavery. And so Martha had friends and neighbors who were Black. And she knew their names and she wrote their names in her diary and she delivered their babies and she traded with them. And there is no indication that she treated them any differently than anyone else in town. But this one woman, her name is never recorded, which to me, from my perspective as a novelist, I had to believe it's because she didn't know it. And if she didn't know it, why not? And so that's sort of how Doctor's character came to be. And it was, I just wanted to include her.
Mm.
Martha included her in her diary. And I think it is remarkable that there was a Black female physician living and working in Maine in the late 1700s. We should remember that. And even if everything else about her is entirely fictional, sort of how she interacts with Martha is fiction, I thought it was worth having her there, just that she would be remembered.
Mm.
An anonymous attendee asks, I love the Shakespeare references, and I wonder how they came to be in the story.
Oh, that is a great question. I love including literary references in my books. It's just a fun thing. In Codename Helene, there's a lot of Victor Hugo.
Mhm.
I have done Rudyard Kipling quite a bit. It's just fun. It's fun for me. I don't know, it makes me happy while I'm working. But if you're writing a book in the 1700s, you don't have a lot of published authors to go with. So I thought it would be really fun to have the Bard. And I thought it would be really fun to have Martha's husband be a huge Shakespeare fan. So you can't see it over there on my desk. I actually have a book called The Botanical Shakespeare, and it is this really beautiful illustrated book. Actually, hold on, I can get it. One second. It'll take me half a second to get it. It's this really beautiful illustrated book, and in it, you will have, I don't know, pictures of different vegetation that is included in Shakespeare's plays, along with the specific quotes. So some of the quotes are not, botanically related, but I thought it was very fitting since Martha spent so much time in her workroom making tinctures and syrups to include that, but also it just became fun for Martha and her husband to be able to banter back and forth and use that.
Right.
Now, I know you had talked earlier about the enormity of the research that you did for this book. Jill wants to know, did you edit anything out of the book that you wish you had kept in?
Yes, and I'm still so sad about it. So in the way that Martha's fox opens and closes the book, there were 4 or 5 other animals that I included in a similar way. There are 6 sections in the book, and each section began with one of the animals. So we had Martha's horse, Brutus. There was Ephraim's peregrine falcon, Percy. There was, oh, the really horrible coyote. There was a rabbit that was cut from the book entirely. There was a bull. I loved those scenes so much. And every one of them sort of introduced a murder suspect to you as the reader. I was so proud of myself. I loved those scenes, and nobody else did. My agent was like, they're so pretty, but I don't know what they mean. And my editor was like, no. And I fought for them and I rewrote them and I did everything that I could to include them. And finally, I had to tell myself, okay, if you have to explain it, it's not working. So I cut them, but I did have published them as sort of cut scenes on my blog. So you can go to ariellawhon.substack.com and there's a tab there where it says cut scenes. And so you can read all of those scenes from those different animals. It was a really good lesson for me as a writer. If I have to explain it, it's not working. And I might love something so much, but it doesn't do a service to the reader. So they're gone.
I'm going to jump in here and do a quick
other details.
I'm going to do a quick plug for your newsletter because I signed up when we first started putting this together.
Yeah.
And I was loving you were going off to Scotland and what you were going to do and why you were looking forward to it. And I love that because a lot of times for readers, in between reading books about the authors, they don't hear anything about the writer and what they're doing in their life. And I highly recommend that you go to her site and sign up for it because I really enjoyed reading it. And a lot of times I'd read and I go, but it was really well done. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. I try really hard to make them entertaining. I want you to feel a smaller version of what you feel when you read my book if one of my newsletters shows up in your inbox. So if anybody missed that, in case you're curious, it is my name, ariellawhon.substack.com, and you can pop your email address in and then you'll be signed up and there's all kinds of stuff on there.
Really good.
Mary asks, your passages about Martha's children contracting diphtheria were heartbreaking, but so relatable to me, having sat for so many hours with my ill children. I assume you have too. I liked how during the children's burial scenes, Elspeth, the old midwife and mentor, was the person to come to the gravesite. Did you intend it as a complete full circle moment after their rocky professional and personal start, which eventually ended with mutual respect?
Yes, absolutely. Elspeth, I mean, as you've read the novel, she plays such a small role. I wanted to show how Martha got her start in midwifery. So there's at the end of every section of the book, there's the flashback that takes you back to an earlier point in Martha's life. There are 6 of them total in the book. They're all really important. One of them is how Martha became a midwife, how she got into the profession and sort of this old cantankerous woman that kind of forced her into it. Martha did not, in my fictional version, no one to this day knows how she became a midwife, but I thought it was important to answer how it could have happened. Martha or Elspeth says basically, I pick you, and sort of drags Martha into it, kicking and screaming a little bit. And then later, many, many, many years later, when Martha is at her lowest and most broken as a woman, as a mother, is when Elspeth shows back up and comforts her in a way that no one else can. And I love doing that. I love doing that in fiction. I love to show redemption. I love to show full circle moments. I love to be able to circle back to somebody's life and say, it gets better, it changes. And I don't know, I also wanted the reader to understand how Martha became such a compassionate woman, how she could sit with other people in their worst, hardest, most broken moments. It's a learned behavior, and she learned it at the feet of a very good woman.
Terry wants to know if you read Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's book, A Midwife's Tale, and if you
I
did,
did indeed.
what did you take from it?
There are basically 2 books that you can read about Martha Ballard. You can read Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's biography, A Midwife's Tale. As I said, it won the Pulitzer. It is astonishing. It is a 30,000-foot view of her life. It is this bigger, broader look at what life was like for Martha and for everyone else that lived in her town at this time. And then, of course, you can read Martha's words herself, which are this close-up personal. She tells you what she cooked for dinner. She tells you whose baby she delivered. But the novel has to be somewhere in between, right? You have to have the broad scope of what life is, and you have to have the dailiness, but I needed a story in between. So I loved this book. It was incredibly informative. If you want more Martha, absolutely go read it. But I also had to keep sort of an emotional distance from it, because if you read this book, you will not recognize the Martha Ballard in my novel. My main job as a novelist is to make a real person feel real to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be in my way. It has to be my version of that person. And of course, I'm staying true to history. Of course, I'm being accurate. In this particular novel, though, we get 6 months. We get 6 months of her life. We don't get much of what came before, other than the flashbacks, and we don't get anything of what came afterward. So I have to write Martha as though she's a character that I'm making up. I have to find her voice. I have to make her mine. So again, absolutely, I recommend that book, but they are not the same woman. And they shouldn't be. I shouldn't have pulled the Martha that came to Laurel Thatcher Ulrich into mine.
Also, yours is first person. Is that book first person, or is
Oh,
it
no, this is
third?
third. It's I mean,
Third, right?
yeah, it's a historical book. It is a biography, so it's not,
Yeah,
it is
it'll make it
comparing.
completely different. It's completely
Yeah.
different just by taking it from the one POV.
Yeah, it is comparing apples and tennis shoes. It's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Patricia wants to know if you have a connection to Hollowell.
I don't. I had never even been to Maine. I originally wanted to go. I was going to take a research trip, and then COVID happened and I didn't get to go anywhere. I sat in this room right here for 2 years and wrote that book. So I have no connection to Maine. I did finally get to go for the first time on book tour at the beginning of November, and it was dark. I drove in the dark and I saw nothing other than the inside of my event space. So I was a little bit sad about that. I want to go back just by myself, not on book tour, not doing anything publishing related. I want to go back and I want to pay my respects to Martha.
Mhm.
And so Hallowell is present day Augusta, but they have a Martha Ballard walk that you can take throughout the town.
Mhm.
Earlier this year, I did an event with the Maine State Library. It was an online event, and Hallowell is raising money to erect a statue in honor of Martha Ballard. I would like to go say hello to her. I don't think I really understood when I was writing the book what she means to that town. She
Mhm.
is their claim to fame. She is their patron saint, you could say. And I my plan is to go back with my husband at some point, take a long weekend, be a tourist,
Yeah.
and pay my respects.
Wow.
That'll be so much fun for
It
sure.
would be. It'd be great.
I think we'll end the Q&A with this question from Linda. Is this wonderful book being made into a movie or TV series? If so, who do you see playing Martha? And I saw that that question was asked by a few other people. They're
Yeah,
curious.
so far, no one is interested. I've kind of been told in no uncertain terms that Hollywood is not interested in telling this story. It might be the time frame, I don't know. Um, but yeah, there's no interest, which is wild to me, actually, because it is hands down the most commercially successful book that I have written thus far. But yeah, I guess Hollywood just has different stories to tell.
They come and
I,
go. They come and
yeah,
go in
they do.
waves.
I mean, and
And
who knows, that, to be quite honest with you, that could change tomorrow. But as of today, no one has approached me about it. And I will say I typically don't have actresses in mind when I write stories. I have friends that can hear the characters and they see them in their head. None of that happens for me. All of my people are mute and invisible. I see and hear nothing in my head. But I earlier this year I was watching Wheel of Time with my youngest son. It was one of the shows he wanted to watch. And I saw Rosamund Pike and I thought, oh,
Mhm.
Oh, she would make a great Martha. Just, I feel like she says so much with her face. And
Hmm.
Martha is such a taciturn woman. I thought that Rosamund Pike would be good. But other people have had other ideas. I'm welcome. I'd love to hear who you saw in your head. That's actually kind of fun.
You know what I also love too is it's set in one place. It's in one town. There's not a lot of, and a lot of what's not getting made these days is it's big. You have to
Right,
have like a war scene, or you have to have this or that or
right.
the other thing. You've got to have the river. The river's got to be frozen. You've got a town. You've got a brew, like a tavern. It's much smaller. So somewhere along the way, I could see it coming back to saying this is
Right.
something I want to do for
Yeah.
that reason.
Yeah. I mean, listen, publishing is hard enough to figure out.
Oh,
I do not pretend to know anything about Hollywood. Um, I can say this. I am so protective of Martha. I love her so much that if anyone came to me and they wanted to make that show, I would probably be like, tell me what you have in mind because I am protective of this one.
let me see the script first. Let me see the
Yeah.
script first. You know, it's not
Yeah.
just about the check. It's about the script. It's like who's
Yeah.
going to do what to who.
Yeah.
What's next? Can you tell us anything?
Oh, yeah. Not afraid to talk about that at all. I'm in the middle of it. I mentioned earlier that it covers more than 30 years, actually, but I am writing a novel that is tentatively called The Pirate Queen, and it is about a woman named Grace O'Malley, who was a female chieftain in Ireland in the 1500s, but she was also a privateer. She was a pirate, and she was so good at her work that she ended up running afoul of the English and was summoned by Queen Elizabeth I to come and meet so that they could settle their differences in person. And Grace prevailed. None of that is a spoiler. That is just the back cover copy. What is fascinating about this woman is that Brian law, so the established law in Ireland in the 1500s, forbade a woman to be a chieftain.
Hmm.
Grace didn't care. She was chieftain anyway. But what it means is that the monks who wrote Irish history purposefully did not include her. So it's called the Annals of the Four Masters is the definitive book of Irish history during that time. And Grace O'Malley is mentioned exactly 0 times, even though she was waging war and doing piracy and leading clans. The entire country knew who she was. The monks chose not to write about her because female chieftains aren't allowed. However, she is found all over the English state papers. The English wrote about her all the time in not flattering ways. I think some of the phrases were a most notable traitoress and the nurse of all rebellions these last 40 years. So, in effect, her life story was written by her enemies, which is, if you're me and you're looking for those kind of stories, that is like
And
gold.
how'd you find this one?
Minding my own business as usual. I don't I do not go looking for these thunderclap ideas. A friend of mine told me to read a book of essays by thriller writers. Like I was just trying to read something different and interesting, trying to figure out what how other authors do it. And my friend said, "Hey, read this book." All of these different thriller authors talk about why they write thrillers. I didn't get past the first essay. I don't even remember who wrote the first essay. All I know is I got to the end and she had to answer the question that all of the contributors were asked, which was, if you could have dinner with 5 people, living or dead, who would it be? And she said, so and so, and so and so, and so and so. I don't remember who the first 3 were. But then she says, then I would have Grace O'Malley and her arch rival, the Queen Elizabeth I. Or she said, Grace O'Malley, the pirate queen of Ireland, and her rival, Queen Elizabeth I. And I sat up in bed and I was like, who is this pirate queen? I was reading on my iPad and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep. My husband's over there snoring. And I don't think I went to bed until 4. I went down this rabbit hole of, and I wrote my friend the next day. I was like, damn it, you accidentally inspired my next book, but I don't have time. I don't have time for this because I was still writing Martha Ballard's story. So I kind of had to put her on the back burner for a minute, but I'm in it.
You're in it now.
I am in it now. And technically, theoretically, it's supposed to be out next year.
Okay.
We shall see. It always depends on 50 factors, most of which are out of my control.
Yeah, and it's also things like getting it right, and making sure the right book is exactly right before it hatches.
It matters. And it really matters to me now, particularly coming on the heels of Martha's story. I don't feel like I can put out another book that isn't as good or better. After so many people have read this one and liked this one, I feel like I have a responsibility to you and to everyone else that reads it to only give you the best story that I can possibly write.
Yeah, and I think that becomes, as time goes on, that is
Yeah.
what I see. That's what I've got to do. And I'm not just phoning it in. It's like, and some people are just saying, oh, it's the next book, it's under contract, it's a book a year, it's this, that, the other thing. And I see where we're starting to move away from that because there's too much pressure. There's too much pressure to sit there and say, this is what it's going to be. It really is.
Well, it is. And look, it is hard to write a bad book. It is hard to write a bad one. If you write a good one, that is an act of God in Congress. But also, if you're placing your trust in me as a writer, you're giving me several days of your life, whatever it is that a hardcover costs these days, you are trusting me to take you somewhere and give you an experience. And if I don't deliver that, it's not good. It's not good for either of us if I don't consistently deliver that. So it really, really matters to me that that book is only published when I can go, I cannot make it better.
Right. I can't do this anymore. I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've been taking a little glance because some of the chat's been popping up. People have so appreciated your spending this time with us. Thank you so very, very much. We know that time is precious, especially when you've got a family with 4 boys and a husband, and it's Christmas time and whatever. So thank you very, very much for making this a really special evening for our readers.
Thank you. It means the world to me. I'm so glad that you were willing to give me your night. I'm so glad that we could sit here and talk about Martha and what she accomplished. I just wish she could see it. I wish for the last year that she could see all of the people that have joined me in bookstores or just all of these groups that sit around in their living rooms and talk about her. Like, I think she would be amazed that she did this.
Yeah, this is what you brought together. This is what you brought together with the people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. I'm happy to be here.
And I've got a bunch of other announcements about what's coming up. So, Ariel, you're welcome to leave or you're welcome to stay, whichever you like. And if there's anything wrong at the beginning, I'll let you know.
Oh, no. I'm going to say goodnight. I have a kid who is at a wrestling competition, so I might miss the last one, but I'm going to try to make it. So
you go run. Thank you so
much.
Thank
you very much.
Lovely evening. Okay, bye-bye now. Okay. And for everybody else, a couple more announcements from us. First of all, tonight's event will be available on YouTube. And if we had that little tech glitch, I have no idea what that was. We will make sure that that gets fixed. I'll try and re-record or whatever. And it'll be on video and podcast probably the end of this week. And we'll let you know when that is live. We've created an events page on TBR Network where you can sign up for all of our programs. So if you go to tbrnetwork.com, you've got all the programs there. Our next Bookaccino Live book group program is going to be on Wednesday, January 29th at 8 o'clock with Ashley Elston joining us to discuss her thriller, First Lie Wins. And this book has been wildly, wildly embraced this year. Want to start out the year with the thriller, so looking forward to that. And you've got time to go read it. So make sure you now have what, almost 2 months to read. So put that on your list. First Lie Wins. Got a couple of events before that. Next Wednesday night, December 11th at 8 o'clock, we'll be hosting our book reporter reviewers for their annual Best of the Year program. Our reviewers are going to be joining us, talking about a couple of books that they really loved and giving their feedback in the background on the books besides what you've read in their reviews. And then our first Bookaccino Live book preview event of 2025 will be held on Wednesday, January 8th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So there'll be sign up ready for that. And we're going to do a special winter evening program, a preview event on Wednesday, January 22nd at 8 o'clock. For any of you who work during the day and can't sneak away and watch on Zoom, we've got you covered. And we're going to do a whole winter, what the winter books are that we've been thinking of that would be of interest to you. So we'll when we get the interview recorded and sent to you, we will also send you those dates as well. You sign up for our events at the Book Report Network newsletter. You'll never miss an event. And we've got more than 200 Book Reporter Talks to interviews available on our YouTube channel, the Book Report Network, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to Tom Donadio, our amazing, amazing editorial director and our host this evening of all the Q&A. And to everybody, thank you for joining us, and good night.